yesterday, it was yesterday, I was talking to someone and visiting someone, and on their wall was a picture of Wesley preaching on his father's gravestone at Epworth. And I mean, most extraordinary stories. They do some. The rector had refused him entry, and then his father had been rector.
That's right. Yes.
And what? And was that the beginning of early on in his ministry?
Yes, Wesley had been his father's curate in Epworth.
Oh, had he?
So there was.
So it was even the church where he'd ministered.
Even the church where he had ministered. That's right. Yes. And he had gone back as part of his commitment to preaching, and, as was not uncommon, was refused entry to preach in the parish church. And taking matters into his own hands, he thinks that his father's grave is a good foundation, in more ways than one. It's a convenient place to stand, but it says something about the faith in which he stood.
Isn't that, I mean, extraordinary symbol.
It is. Yeah.
And it's also, I think one of the things, I was just looking at it and thinking of the tragedy of the division between what is now Methodism, but at the time he would have felt himself to be an Anglican.
Oh, indeed. Yes.
He used Anglican liturgy.
Yes.
And he would, as we're talking about today, and encouraging people to pray, he would have used that phrase, "Thy kingdom come."
Yes.
What I look at people like that in those days, what would he have been thinking if you'd said to him, "What do you expect when you pray, Thy kingdom come"? What do you think?
The important thing to remember about Epworth in the Methodist narrative is that in many respects, at the age of, 4 or 5, Wesley's life was changed dramatically by a fire in the rectory. And just at the point of collapse, Wesley was rescued from an upper window in the rectory. And in many ways, that says a great deal about the future of Wesley's faith. His mother believed he was a brand as plucked from the burning. Therefore, I think there's a moment of transformation at that juncture. He understands it later on in his life. That to participate in God's kingdom is an extraordinary revolution within oneself, and it's a revolution in the world about the things that really matter. And of course, Wesley's mother, who taught him how to pray, Wesley's mother felt that moment showed that Wesley was contributing, she wouldn't have put it this way, was contributing to the transformation of the rule of God, and that it was his role, initially as an Anglican curate and then as a travelling preacher, to say as much as he possibly could, in as many forms as he possibly could, to as many people as he possibly could. And therefore the transformation, "Thy kingdom come," for Wesley, I think, is a realization that you are participating in the reign of God's love, that you are called to bring about transformation, and that you do it exactly where you are.
The Methodist Church institutionally is taking a phenomenal part in this wonderful gift that we've all received from God, which has taken us all by surprise, I think, in the way that it's grown. And what's your hope when people round the world are praying, "Thy kingdom come"? It sounds to me as though you're saying that they're committing themselves to action as well as to seeking God's action.
Yes. It's the recognition, I think, "Thy kingdom come," that we're part of a very, very bigger picture. Across time and space, we find ourselves united with all God's people. But this is something that I participate in, that I'm called to do by the grace of God, because God's kingdom is about the now. And therefore I do that whether I'm a Methodist minister, whether you're an Anglican priest. You do it whether you are cleaning, whether you're engaged in banking, whether you're engaged in physics. It's the understanding of the possibility of God's grace in any of those encounters.
It's phenomenally challenging. I mean, earlier today I was in the place where I opened my life to Christ over 40 years ago, 42, 43 years ago. And with the person who, in that room, led me to faith, my heart had been warmed, to use a rather Methodist expression, in the previous couple of years, particularly in Kenya with my encounter with the East African revival. But he was saying, when he'd only been a Christian himself a very short period, and yet the one thing he knew is that at that moment, that to testify to his own faith and to the grace of God, the gift of God, was crucial. But that springs out of that prayer, thy kingdom come.
Yes, and each of us needs to communicate something of that, don't we?
Yeah.
You and I are both able to say thy kingdom come because others helped us to say it. And they helped us to begin to understand it. So rather like Wesley's preaching on the foundation of his own spiritual nurturing by his mother and father in Epworth, each of us relies hugely on those who've gone before us in the faith. But we're also enriched by the way that we talk about our faith. And I think the other dimension to thy kingdom come is also a willingness to act and speak in ways that give glimpses of the kingdom.
I think, and that, I mean, that's one of the reasons that every day here we pray for the unity of the church.
Yes.
Because I think that's also one of the things that demonstrates the reality of the unity of the reality of the kingdom.
Yes.
Is differences being overcome in the way that Jesus overcame the difference between the gap between ourselves and God. He bridged that gap, and he calls us to participate in that work.
Yes, there is inherent in the desire to see God's kingdom come a desire for the unity of all God's people.
Absolutely.
And we've become complacent, I think, even oblivious perhaps to the scandal of our disunity.
Too comfortable with it.
Yes.
I think that's absolutely right.
And that's both about church institutions, and I dare say in our less alert moments, we think we can get by without God's grace.
Do you know, that's exactly what we were talking about earlier today. We slip back into that.
Yes.
And thy kingdom come, to me, reminds me that it's God's kingdom, it's not my work.
Yes, absolutely.
And it's his initiative, not my bright ideas.
Yes, yes.
And that prayer is another way of sort of essentially saying, oh, help.
Yes. Yes.
I don't know how, when, where,
yes.
but thy kingdom come.
Yes. Yes.
And the quid pro quo is I will take part in your action.
Indeed. And neither is it quite saying, okay, then God, come and do your stuff and I'll just respond.
It's not.
It's the active participation in the very nature of God's love.